The 50 Class 50s, originally the D400 class, were built by English Electric at its Vulcan Foundry Works near Newton-le-Willows in Lancashire, and introduced to service with British Rail in 1967 and 68. Producing 2,700 brake horsepower and capable of 100 miles an hour, the new locomotives were primarily used to haul West Coast Main Line express passenger trains north from Crewe after investment for full electrification through to Glasgow was initially not authorised. Trains were electric hauled as far as Crewe, where diesels took over. Although commonplace today, at the time unusually the Class 50s were not owned by British Rail. They were in fact leased from English Electric directly for a period of 10 years, and were not purchased outright until the initial lease period expired. The 28th locomotive built of the order, D427, rolled off the production line in spring 1968, and following commissioning, it was accepted into service on the 10th of June 1968, ready for a career that would span just over 23 years. Initially based at Crewe Diesel Depot for maintenance purposes, D427 joined its classmates allocated to the London Midland region, working the Western Line's area. Duties were mainly on the West Coast Main Line, between Crewe and Glasgow, but like the rest of the class, the locomotive made appearances all round northwest England, with occasional forays to the east of Scotland and the West Midlands too. Works attention was carried out at Crewe, and D427 received its first classified repair, a light overhaul, there in September 1971. On return to service some 3 years after standard gauge steam was abolished by BR, the D for diesel prefix was dropped from the locomotive and it would now be known simply as 427. 2 years later, 427 re-entered Crewe works for an intermediate overhaul. Emerging in January 1974, the locomotive was now numbered 50027 in accordance with the TOPS numbering system. After investment to electrify the rest of the West Coast Main Line, it became clear that the Class 50s would lose their mainline duties to new builds of electric locomotives. The BR National Traction Plan, however, earmarked the 50s for new work on the Western region, helping to replace the diesel hydraulic traction, which was to be phased out in the 1970s. The big changeover was to take place in May 1974. But a number of Class 50s were transferred south in advance to be used for staff training. In March of that year, 50027 was allocated briefly to Bristol Bath Road Depot, before being moved on to Lyra in Devon. The locomotive was used extensively for driver training in Cornwall, and made the class's debut at Penzance. By May 1976, the entire fleet of 50s had been rehomed on the western route, being based at Bristol and Lyra. From 1978, BR began applying names to the Class 50s, and by the close of 1979 the whole fleet had been named after Royal Navy warships or shore establishments. On the 17th of April 1978, and without ceremony, Lyra Depot christened 50027 Lion, the 15th of the class to be named. HMS Lion was a battle cruiser, the flagship of Admiral Beatty's fleet at the Battle of Jutland in 1916. She came close to sinking during the action, with only flooding of the magazines preventing her from blowing up. In more recent times, the name was carried by a Tiger class cruiser, which served between 1960 and 1975. As the Intercity 125 high-speed train took over most of the Toplink Class 50 duties on the western route, the class were cascaded to pastures new. From May 1980, the 50s took over on the Exeter to Waterloo line, resulting in a significant speed-up of the service, as well as adding an extra coach to most service trains. Class 50s became known for unreliability, and this resulted in a refurbishment program being carried out between 1979 and 1983. Now based at Old Oak Common Depot, Lion was one of the last of the fleet to be treated, and finally emerged in July 1983, now painted with the new large logo livery. From 1987, the first Class 50s were taken out of service for good. By this time the 50s had lost most of their top link duties on the western region, as Intercity opted to use Class 47s on its remaining locomotive hauled trains. With the new diesel multiple unit deliveries set to take over provincial duties and the impending loss of the newspaper trains, the 50s were facing an uncertain future. By May 1989, more had been withdrawn, and the survivors were left with the NSE duties, split between the Thames and West of England routes. Lion joined 19 of its classmates working on the Waterloo to Exeter line. As locomotive haul trains were reduced nationwide, a number of Class 47s, mainly from Scotland, became available to replace the more expensive to run and less reliable Class 50s on both of their NSE routes. Entering summer 1991, Lion continued in service on the Waterloo line, but the passenger fleet size had now shrunk to around a dozen. From the 8th of July the 47s should have taken over, but as is often the case, the old order had a stay of execution, and several Class 50s hung on until 1992. For Lion, however, time had run out, and required new bogies due to worn out wheels. The locomotive was switched off for the final time on 12th of July 1991. With NSE now determined to eliminate the 50s as soon as possible, Lion was officially withdrawn on the 23rd of July 1991, after a career spanning 23 years. The locomotive also required engine repairs, for which expenditure was not authorised, and so Lion became the 37th Class 50 to be sidelined. Further shortages of traction on the Waterloo line led to consideration being given to reinstating some 50s, including Lion, in the autumn, but this ultimately came to nothing. By the end of their working lives, Class 50s had become very popular with enthusiasts, with the last 5 locomotives in traffic being designated rail tour engines. This popularity led to over 1/3 of the fleet eventually being preserved. Some members of the class have since returned to mainline use in the 21st century, ranging from spot hire duties to hauling regular passenger services. In 1992, Lion was purchased by Mike Fuller, who arranged for the locomotive to be based at the Mid-Hants Railway. After being towed from Lyra, it became one of the first 50s to work in preservation when it hauled a passenger train from Alton to Alresford on the 17th of May 1992. 2 years later, Lion left the Mid-Hants Railway, and following an appearance at Exeter Rail Fair and Crew Works Open Day, the locomotive arrived at the North Yorkshire Moors Railway at Gromont. Arriving too late to haul any trains during the 1994 operating season, the locomotive remained on the line and finally entered service on the 6th of May 1995, when it worked 2 return trips between Gromont and Pickering. The locomotive remained at the North York Moors for a further 17 years before returning to the Mid-Hants Railway on the 14th of June 2012. Over the following years, Lion proceeded to work passenger trains as well as assisting with specials, services during dry summer steam bans, and even filming work for Channel 4's drama Electric Dreams. Unfortunately, she was withdrawn from service during the 2018 Diesel Gala after developing a radiator leak. The radiators are used for cooling the engine compartment, and the repair work itself proved to be an arduous task, requiring the radiators to be lifted out of a locomotive by the railway steam train and a new floor be installed in the radiator compartment. The time out of service was taken as an opportunity to carry out further repairs and refurbishment, with 200 hours being spent on stripping back and painting the brake frame alone. Sadly, during this time, Lion's saviour Mike sadly passed away following an illness. Mike had involvement in not only saving Lion from the cutter's torch, but also another member of the class. Lion was in Mike's ownership longer than British Rails, which is some achievement. The repairs were completed in October 2019, and she returned to traffic that winter, assisting with the railway's Santa Specials. Work has now focused on repairing and repainting the roof, to make sure it is as watertight as possible. It has spent the majority of its life outside, and the weather wasn't always kind. Her dedicated volunteers are always busy, but Lion can occasionally be seen hauling passenger trains at its current home, the Mid-Hants Railway, the Watercress Line.